Happy Thursday afternoon. My name is Jim Bachman. I'm with the Maryland Distillers Guild, and I'm going to be joined today by a really great group of distillers, distillery operators, and owners who are going to talk to us about everything there is to know about Maryland gin. We've got some really great producers on today, and we're celebrating Maryland Spirits Month together. So this is the first of a couple of these videos that we're going to do where we bring several distillery operators, distillers, and owners in to talk about the spirits that they specialize in or that they're noted for making. And we're going to try to educate everybody and maybe learn a little bit between each other about what we're talking about. If you have any questions about what's going on with Maryland Spirits Month this year, please visit marylandspirits.org and check out the Maryland Spirits Month menu item in our drop down on the right of the screen. We have some great calendar information on there with updates about releases, markets where our members are going to be located, or events that they may have going on in their distillery tasting rooms or cocktail lounges. And we'd love for you to help support these distilleries throughout the month. I also want to give a really big shout out to the Montgomery County Alcohol Beverage Services. In each of the 28 locations that they operate throughout Montgomery County, they're offering 10% off Maryland Spirits throughout the entire month. And there's nothing more that we can do than say thank you. That's really, really awesome of them to extend that promotion and highlight our state's makers. So we very much appreciate that. If you're in Montgomery County or close to there, please visit one of their locations, show your support for Maryland Spirits, and they'll knock a couple bucks off your bottle purchase. So in the meantime, if Montgomery County is not accessible, visit any one of the distilleries in the state. Everybody's open either for curbside pickup, carryout, or on-premise consumption and purchase. Just check with who you're going to visit and see what their policies are right now. And remember, please wear your mask and stay safe. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Braden with McClintock Distilling, Jeff and Nate at Sang Froid. Is that correct?
You got it.
Cool. I've got Mark from 10th Ward and Max from Baltimore Spirits Company.
Howdy.
Everybody, thank you for jumping in. It does look like a very homogenous group today. We've got a bunch to talk about gin, but I think it's going to work out well. And I think that there's some exciting stuff to talk about. So right off the bat, who wants to take the lead and tell everybody what gin is?
Well, I mean, I was going to say, I always tell people, if you want to know what the basic of what gin is essentially the first flavored vodka. And obviously, like, I think Braden and Max and the guys at Sang Froid could speak a little more in depth in terms of, modern styles and London dry styles. But a little bit before we had hopped onto this call, we were talking about the history of gin and how gin, kind of became gin. And I don't know if that's something, Jim, that you'd like to hop into immediately, talk about that history, or just what is gin?
I like the thought process there that essentially, to start out, let's call it a flavored vodka. So from there, let's jump backwards in time. I guess it goes all the way back to like the 13th or 14th century that people started producing some flavored clear spirit in Holland, right?
Yeah. So it's like, I feel like any other type of spirit that you learn about. There's about 20 different stories of how it got started, and you're going to find people that are going to get into fights over which is the true one. Kind of the apocryphal one that people will point to is there was a doctor at the University of Leiden in the Netherlands. He's mentioned, I think it's in the late 17th century, as seeking a cure for stomach and kidney disorders. And so he created this distilled spirit with juniper, which was called Genever or Genever or Genever. I feel like just like there's different stories, there's different ways to pronounce it. But if you actually look at the true history of it, there's writing going back to, 1552, I think, is you see some medicinal distilled spirits made with juniper being talked about. And of course, like a lot of great boozes, it started out as medicine. You look at things like chartreuse, you look at things like Benedictine. Genever was prescribed as a medicinal a quaff for people who are struggling. But yeah, it's kind of interesting because if you look at that historic, it was typically distilled from what we call malt wine, which is malted grains distilled out and then flavored with juniper. if you look at like traditional Genevers, you have this very almost like whiskey-like note to it because it uses that malt wine base. It's a little bit softer. Well, it traditionally does have juniper. It doesn't have to be like main front and center juniper flavor like we typically think of when we're thinking of like a London Dry. But yeah, then, over the years that got developed, distillation techniques improved, and then you actually have the 30-Year War, where the English and the Dutch fought side by side. And during that war, the British soldiers started to notice that their Dutch fellow soldiers will actually like take the shot of something before they would charge into battle. And so they started calling that Dutch courage. That was Genever. And the soldiers developed this taste for this Dutch spirit, brought it back over to England. And then as you saw distillation technology improve, you started to get more and more of a neutral, pure spirit. And they would start distilling from those neutral spirits with the juniper, started adding in different botanicals, and eventually evolved into what we now think of as London Dry gin, which I think is what most people kind of think of when you talk about gin. That's like the Cliff's Notes version. And yeah, and anybody feel free to come in and correct me on this stuff too.
I think that was a really good background, and I like the kind of like the anecdotal stories, when you can tie things in from reports that people were getting back from English soldiers and stuff like that. And I know that gin ended up playing a role with more than one group of colonial or imperial nations in times of like fighting scurvy and all that kind of stuff, right? Like the idea of like the ability to mix fruits with things that would just kind of increase your daily intake of necessary vitamins and nutrients and all that kind of stuff. But I imagine that's probably about 100 years away from where we are right now.
I mean, yeah, it is super cool. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, I'm fascinated by this kind of history, and I think that this is the kind of stuff that really lays a solid foundation for why there may be such a popular or nostalgic look at how things are going right now. So you've mentioned Genever several times, and not ironically, but it happens that all four of your businesses are tied together with this product. Each of you have either produced one on your own, produced something similar to it, or have produced one in collaboration. And I know that Max and Braden were just showcasing their bottles here. Can you guys talk a little bit about the collaboration that you've worked on with the Genever, and then maybe we can talk about the either Genever style or Genever inspired styles that everybody else is doing?
Yeah, I mean, as Mark was just saying, Genever would have been the kind of precursor to what we now think of as gin. And when most people think about gin, they think about juniper and other botanicals distilled into a neutral spirit. Genever was kind of the previous version before people really had the technology to make true neutral spirits. They would distill juniper and other botanicals into more of a kind of malt whiskey base, a grain spirit, essentially. Not unlike modern white whiskey. And McClintock and Baltimore Spirits Company have a lot of experience doing grain spirits as well as some really high quality, beautiful gins. So we hatched this idea many years ago, and it took us a little while to get it together. But I'm not sure if it's quite a year and a half ago that we did the initial distillation.
I think that's about right.
I mean, it's about right. We essentially took the low wines, or the first distillate, off of a grain fermentation. So we have Epic Rye. We did a fermentation, distilled it one time, and then sent this kind of half-complete product over to McClintock. McClintock has their Bootjack Rye, distilled it one time into kind of a half-finished product, and sent the low wines over to Baltimore Spirits Company. We distilled our Shot Tower Gin botanicals into their low wines. They distilled their Forager Gin botanicals with some slight alterations into our Epic Rye low wines. Half of it went out as white Genever about 18 months ago, and the other half is coming out of barrel. We emptied our barrel yesterday, I believe, and McClintock just finished bottling their dumped barrel, but we've got an aged version coming out, which will be a very cool side-by-side with the unaged version in about 2 weeks. I think release in 2 weeks, yeah?
Yeah, so we were around there. We'll have more info soon. But we wanted to tie it in, when we kick this off, Genever is such a interesting spirit. You know, it is that grandfather of gin. It has that element of history, which is really cool. But when we started this project, we really wanted to put a Maryland-centric twist on it, which is why we used our rye whiskeys as a base. I think most traditional, if you're looking at like the Dutch style Genevers, they're generally malted barley. I think all of the big ones, if you look at like Lucas Bowles and Boomsaw and all of those ones that are still being produced, generally use malted barley. And so when we did ours, we wanted to use a rye whiskey base, and we had a great time because our rye whiskeys are very different from each other. We use, an unmalted rye blend that's finished with wheat and corn. So it paired really nicely with Max and Eli's botanicals. And when we got in there, so theirs is really dark. It's really malty. I think it's 100% rye. Is that right, Max?
It is just rye and malted rye. Yeah.
Right. So it's like this really beautiful, bold, like, more peppery spirit that worked really well with a modified version of our forager. And then with that barrel aged program, we wanted to put even, being Marylanders, we put rye in everything. We aged it and used rye whiskey barrels. So when we popped the barrel, I was super happy with the way it came out because that, you get the vanilla, you get the caramel, you get that barrel sweetness, that honey notes, but that rye whiskey added that black pepper and some really nice, more like, deep cherry notes to it as well. So it was really fun, and I'm sad this will be the last version of the collaboration. So we're already kicking around the ideas of what we'll be doing moving forward.
Have you guys? I'm curious because like looking at the history of Genever and having that barrel age, did you guys utilize pre-used barrels or did you guys go into new oak?
We went. So we aged our version in our used bootjack barrels, and I think Max, talk about what you guys did.
I think we did a used barrel, although it's not actually top of mind. But I think it would have been a used Epic barrel.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh, unless it was a used Epic then used gin barrel. But I think it was actually just a used Epic barrel.
Now, is there a rich tradition of resting gin in wood, or is it? I mean, if you go into a liquor store, 90% of the options that you're going to see are clear spirit. Is that something that came out of just consumer preference or desire to make a more beautiful cocktail in terms of color? I mean, what kind of drove that, or was that kind of always how it was?
Yeah,
sorry,
somebody else take it. I just got done talking, but I know a number of you probably have an answer to this.
Oh yeah, so it's kind of interesting. You look back at, again, talking about how nobody agrees on the history of stuff, but you can kind of look back at the history of Genever, and obviously used barrels were utilized a lot for storage and for shipping. But I think in a modern context, you can definitely look at it again, as both Braden and Max had said. You have that basically a white whiskey base that you're adding your botanicals to, so it just kind of makes sense. It follows that if you're utilizing this white whiskey base, obviously those same flavors, that same grain, that same spice that develops and perfects on oak, you're going to be able to get that same style if you're using it in a Genever. And I know for us, when we've talked about it, it's always also focusing on not just taking that same recipe and transferring it over into a barrel, but adjusting those botanicals for something that also complements the barrel as well, that you're going to maybe do something that's a little bit more savory. You're going to do something that's a little bit heavier, so you're not going to have conflicting notes on that. But I've been talking a lot too. So
it's all right because we're getting really good information out of this, and I think it's stuff that people are going to kind of want to know. And when they come into your tasting rooms to explore what you're offering, they're going to have a better background. The concept of the barrel aged stuff and kind of this transition from Genever to gin, I was going to pose to Nate and Jeff because I know that they offer the Dutch style gin. So I'm kind of curious where the bridge is from one foundation to where we start to call things gin. And then I'm wondering what inspired your barrel aged gin, because it sounds like there's this history that's rich there. And if you're just kind of buying from that.
Yeah. So ours is we call it Dutch style gin because we come down on the side of history that the Dutch were the first, mostly because family is from the Netherlands. His last name's Groenendijk, so that tipped the scales for us. So we do pretty typical Oude Jenever style and Old Jenever style. So it's super grain forward. We don't add any neutral spirits because we really want to capture as much of the character from we use a rye and a malted barley base as we can. And so ours is probably a little bit distinct from some of the Frederick and Baltimore distilleries in that it's totally that old style, and we call it, again, Dutch style instead of Jenever, partly because we weren't allowed to put Jenever by itself on the label, and we thought Dutch style was a good nod to Nate's forebears. And in terms of the barrel finish, we use a variety of old and new barrels. We find that kind of lets the freshness of that new barrel kind of subside a little bit when we mixed it too. And we usually go in with a little bit higher proof on the gin and that's going into the barrel compared to what we would use with a whiskey, just because we think it takes on that wood pretty well, pretty quickly.
I appreciate the clarification.
Yeah, and again, we call it a barrel finish gin, again, because the TTB, if folks who are listening aren't familiar, there's a government agency that's responsible for giving approval for every label that we put on a bottle, and they would not let us say aged in any form on our gin labels. Even using old style gin or old style Jenever, that's a no-go. So
what is does the TTB not believe that gin is an ageable spirit?
Don't get me started, Jim. Don't get me started.
Actually, well, they just changed that. You can now officially put age statements and years aged on all your gin bottles if you so choose. But
time to redo all those labels, boys.
Yeah, where were they a year ago?
No, we commented on that too, because I think lots of distillers have had those issues. I'm sure folks on this Zoom, on this live broadcast have experienced that too.
Well, and I think I want to pick up on one of the points that Braden was making about the difference of that base spirit. A lot of the London style gin, as it's usually, like you said, a flavored vodka mark, right? And so vodka is sort of this blank canvas, so you are able to distinguish your gin by the botanicals you use. Whereas with the Jenever style, we're distinguishing with the style, with the type of base spirit, right? So are we using 100% rye and malted rye? Are we using rye, malted barley? Those are giving that grain characteristic that really comes through in the end product. That's what's differentiating a lot of the Jenevers on the market.
Well, and I think that's a great point, because we had Braden and Max were talking about they used a 100% rye base and then utilizing a mix of malted rye and malted barley. One thing to kind of hit on what Nate and Jeff were talking about, you talk about the Oude style, the old style. For ours, we kind of split down the middle. So we actually do a 50% malt wine base with a heavy focus on rye, kind of like they had talked about, focusing on that Maryland connection. But then we also then do the other 50% is a neutral cane spirit, focusing on that rum tie-in with Maryland as well. And so to me, it's always cool to be on these conversations where, being able to focus on not just, we're focusing on botanicals, or, hey, we want to make a London Dry, we want to make a new Western style gin, we want to make a Jenever, but how can we take this and put our own spin on it? And how can we focus on and I hate this word in spirits, but for lack of a better word, the terroir of where we're at, and create something that is unique, and that, you could take any of these four spirits side by side, any of our Jenevers, and immediately tell whose is whose. They are so drastically different from not just the botanicals, but those base spirits as well.
I think this is a really awesome transition to kind of where we're going to go next, which is the conversation about what modern gin looks like. What people are buying and drinking now is not your grandfather's Gilbey's that was in a plastic bottle under a cabinet or anything. This is really impressive stuff with really unique additions. I mean, Nate, Jeff, when we visited you guys 2 weeks ago, I learned about a fruit I'd never heard of in my life. And you told us all about that as a botanical addition. Braden, I know you guys have a really rich story behind how you choose the botanicals that you guys are using, and that story carries through to everyone. And Mark, the way that you're talking about bringing this feel of what Maryland is through two different kind of inspirations and meeting somewhere in the middle, and then finding the botanicals that is going to tie that together. I think that's really cool. So maybe we can talk a little bit about what botanicals are typically used in gin. I think people always know there's always a little bit of citrus peel and juniper, but where else do we go? And then maybe we can talk a little bit about what you guys individually are doing with your gins to make them stand out and represent so well.
So I always tell people, so we have a lot of people that come in. Probably the most common thing I hear at our distillery is, I'm here for the whiskey. I'll try the whiskeys. I'll take a vodka. I don't need to try through the gins. And I try to convey to everybody that there is not a single person out there that doesn't like gin. They just haven't found the right gin for them. And I think that's the trend in gin now, which is really interesting is, even if you don't like these really dry, juniper forward London style gins, there's these days citrus gins and coffee gins and chili pepper gins, and there's so many different styles. And I think that's why gin is so I get so excited about gins is, unlike a lot of these spirits where, particularly, whiskeys and tequilas and rums, you're really pigeonholed in the ingredients that you're using to utilize flavor in your spirit. And there's plenty of ways you can ferment it differently, you can distill it differently, you can, barrel age it all different ways. But at the end of the day, you're starting with the same kind of group of flavor elements. And what's special about gin is that you don't have those limitations with gin. Juniper has to be in there, but there is anything else you could think of, you can utilize and have it be a very bold part of your spirit, which is why gin is neat. I know you were asking about more traditional. I think juniper is the only one that legally has to be in gin, but a lot of really common ones you'll find in most gins, especially the London dries. Orange peel, very common. Coriander, very common. Cardamom is another popular one. And then generally you'll find either orris or angelica root as used as a fixative. So if you look at like the big brands, Tanqueray, Beefeater, Bombay, you'll see a lot of those overlapping, and then it's kind of those few others that they changed. And that is what gin was for a while. And I take issue with Gilbey's because Gilbey's is delicious.
I'm not knocking. I'm just saying the experience is a little different.
No, but I think that's exactly what it was. Is for a long time there really wasn't a ton of differentiation in gins. There were variations of a London dry style gin, and I think we're entering in the golden age of gin right now, in the different styles and different ingredients that are being utilized.
And I think that's a great point. There's a podcast that our assistant distiller introduced me to that's split between Baltimore and San Francisco. And it's these two women who sit down, and typically they've been reviewing wine, but over the past couple of months, they've started really getting into cocktails. And I think it was about a month ago, they had this amazing episode where they basically broke down. They were like, I haven't touched gin since college. Everyone has the Seagram's bumpy bottle, gin and juice, way too much. And then they happened to pick up a handful of Maryland gins, and they sat down and tasted them. And they're like, I had no idea gin could be this.
I've met several people with those horror stories from college who have sworn off gin, and now they're like very, very fanatical when it comes to trying new gins. And I always preferred Mountain Dew as my mixer with Seagram. Hey, we had to get right in the Midwest. So why don't we talk a little bit about the botanicals or the ingredients that are setting your gins apart from other things in the market? Because I really think that, Braden, you hit on the point where the few little changes from botanicals between some of those bigger players are the things that really differentiate what those gins are to the consumer and maybe represent where preference lies. And I want everybody to get a chance to talk about the unique things that are found in their gin. So I don't know who wants to start, but somebody please jump in with like, this is the cool thing that's found in our lineup of botanicals.
So we do a number of different ones, but today is almost exactly the 1 year anniversary of the releasing of our Skeleton Spirit gin, which was kind of by design something we wanted to do that would be considered a contemporary botanical gin, meaning less historically grounded in the botanicals than the original Shot Tower gin, which is kind of very firmly a unique expression of American dry. Skeleton Spirit is a lot harder to contextualize historically, but uses some very, very cool botanicals. I believe it's a 14 botanical gin, but the ones that really jump out are eucalyptus and aloe vera to complement the juniper way up front. It's a lime peel gin as opposed to an orange peel gin. It's really dried lime peel forward. And we actually use avocado leaf as well as part of the spice blend, which is very uncommon in general, but I've never seen it listed as another gin ingredient, but a really unique and unexpected flavor profile from the avocado leaf.
That's your gin that has the wonderfully neat blue hue to it, correct?
Correctamundo. Which is, speaking of using anything you want, you definitely can't use butterfly pea flowers in gin in America, because it is not FDA approved. So find something else.
Got to fight the grass.
So
Nate, Jeff, why don't you tell us a little bit about the stuff you guys are using and share a little bit about that crazy little fruit that Jeff held up a few minutes ago.
So for our Dutch style and our barrel finish, we're pretty traditional. We just use juniper, coriander seed, and angelica root. So nothing too out there crazy or wild. But we recently released what we're calling a forage citrus gin. So everyone's been talking about some kind of citrus element, and we wanted to capture that in a gin. And there's this citrus fruit that grows around here, this far north, and it's a cold hardy, frost tolerant citrus. So it's kind of unique that it can grow in the Mid-Atlantic region, and it produces these tiny little fruit they look like a lemon. They don't smell anything like a lemon. It's called a trifoliate orange or a bitter lemon, some people call it. And the tree itself has these 3-inch thorns on it, so it makes collecting these a little bit interesting. But the fruit itself doesn't really have any redeeming qualities in terms of eating or juicing. But the because it's just filled with these giant seeds, so there's almost no juice inside this. But the peel itself is incredibly fragrant, super oily, and it produces a really cool distillate. And we like that we can just walk out in the park that's half a mile from our distillery and collect them wild. They used to be planted around here as hedges because of those thorns, and now they've just taken over everywhere because the seeds get picked up by deer or birds and dropped. And so we got this pretty cool landscape of these crazy little fruits that we use in a gin.
Yeah, one of the things that I recall was you telling us that was a native fruit, and I think collectively all 5 of the people on our team, our heads exploded because we never knew that there was a native citrus fruit here in Maryland that was going to provide such a great aromatic.
It's not native. It was brought to this country, but it's not an invasive, but it does grow this far north. It's a pretty cool fruit.
Braden, Mark, which one of you wants to share your neat botanical story?
Yeah, I guess I can. No, Braden, go ahead.
No, I was saying, Mark, please.
Oh, God. The Canadian standoff. So kind of tying back into what we had talked about earlier, with choosing that base spirit and focusing on that rye and that cane spirit. We also started looking at what were either native Maryland botanicals or botanicals that have been introduced and are grown here. And for me, I've always had a soft spot for persimmons. I think they're just such a underutilized fruit, and they have such a unique earthy texture that can complement either a brighter citrusy note or even a heavier maltier. And so we one of the things that I personally like to do, and we've kind of adopted as a distillery, is really digging into the history of a spirit, finding out, okay, here's how it was made. I always maintain people way more intelligent than me came before, figured this out, So who am I to go in and say that's wrong? But how can we do that, take it, twist it, create something unique that's still delicious, but also something that people haven't had before? So for our Genever, we actually utilize some of those basic botanicals that we've talked about. Obviously, juniper, we utilize angelica root, orris root, cardamom. To give it a little bit of spice and to accent the rye that we use, we do put in fresh ginger root. Then we also do orange peel to give a little bit of that citrus. We do a little bit of elderflower to give it a nice floral note on the nose. But the two things that I think really make ours unique is then we utilize those persimmons, and we also utilize chicory root in our Genever as well. And the chicory root, of course, I think a lot of people associate it with combining it with coffee. It creates this very nice aromatic note to it. And because of that coffee-like note, it's just this very unique, kind of just works to bolster those malted grains that are in there and helps kind of cut through some of that implied sweetness that you get from that cane spirit as well.
That's really neat, that idea of almost like that chicory's always kind of come across to me as like this just little tinge of bitterness that just kind of pops everything else up a little bit and elevates it. So that's really nice to kind of settle down maybe the sweetness that you might get from that cane spirit. Braden, you're up now, man.
We have we utilize a lot of gins. I think we have pretty bad attention deficit, so we're always putting new stuff in the still. The Forager gin was a recipe we started, 8 years ago, 7 years ago, and have been tweaking it. And it started out as a 12 botanical gin, 12 ingredient gin, and then turned into a 16 botanical gin. And by the time we opened, it ended up being a 21 botanical gin. So 21 different ingredients. We spent a long time working on the balance, which I think is, even more important than the ingredients that you're using is maintaining a balance. I think there are very interesting kind of what we call like flavored gins, something that is like, technically it's a gin, but it's really, really dominant in something, which I think are awesome. Especially, I know a lot of bartenders like those because you can put a half ounce of flavored gin in and get cherry or lavender or whatever you're using. We wanted with all of our gins really to create a balance where no single ingredient is really defining the gin, which is kind of why the Forager took so damn long to make, because there is so many ingredients, so many different citrus components and earthy components and floral components and spice components, that it really took us a long time to get that. And then our other two gins, we kind of tried to shrink down the botanicals a bit, but with those ones, we ended up giving it additional depth by doing barrel finishes and used barrels and adding flavor that way. And that was really fun because, with our first gin, it was kind of work through the recipe and then work towards the finished product. With the other two gins we did, we kind of started with the idea of this barrel finishing, incorporating this flavor component and then kind of building around that, kind of like what some of the other guys were saying about with their Genever they're doing, where most gin is starting with a blank canvas, and Genever is fun because you have something there and you got to turn it into something and highlight certain components about it. That's kind of what we did with our barrel finishing gins. Our Reserve, which is aged for a full year and a half in cognac barrels, that flavor is right up front. I mean, that really carries a lot of the front of the palate there. And it was really fun for us to kind of tweak and build this recipe that doesn't cover up the flavor. It's really built to like accent and highlight and turn it into something that's totally different and unique, which is kind of neat.
I recall when you were first sampling your Reserve gin. I was working for a brewery at the time, and we were coming up with a menu for a collaborative beer dinner and spirits dinner. And I remember you handing your sample of that to the chef, and the minute that hit his lips, his eyes lit up like this possibility to do something with gin that nobody had ever done with a pairing before. Like, he was so animated and excited about this. And that was really telling to me as somebody who didn't have much experience with barrel finished gins, to see the culinary impact that could have, and how this spirit really can play a role in more than just going up to a bar and ordering a cocktail and drinking it by itself. You really can start to bring this into kind of the world of enjoyment with meals and as an accompaniment to things. So I kind of want to talk to you guys a little bit about pairing gin with food and maybe how that works and what suggestions you might have for people, or maybe just some general talk about cocktails and how to think about using gin when building great tasting drinks. So whoever would like to start there, I'm all ears and trying to learn more from you.
You know what's interesting about gin cocktails is, and this is really, I will turn it over to somebody else for some more in-depth cocktail stuff. But this kind of is more commentary on the gin market. And as gin distillers, I'm sure we all have this experience. But gin is one of the most ordered spirits in a cocktail bar in America. This is kind of a U.S. thing. And people think they don't like gin, but love the sound of the cocktails and order a ton of them. It's one of the best-selling spirits behind whiskey in cocktail bars, but it's at the very bottom of the rung when it comes to bottles sold in a liquor store. So this kind of current movement of getting people to embrace cocktail culture at home and not just out, also kind of is pushing people into the gin aisle in a way that, I wouldn't say that is mainstream now, but becoming more and more common to have gin at your house, when it used to be really common out, but it didn't really translate to drinking it at home. And I think obviously through the COVID months and people kind of using the time to learn how to cocktail at home, as well as just cocktail culture becoming more prevalent in general, that has really pushed gin into the forefront of a home bar in a way that historically it really hasn't been.
Yeah, I would definitely echo that. One of the things that I'm always kind of proud of is I actually came to distilling from bartending. I was a bartender before I was a distiller. And so, and I think pretty much everyone on here can also relate to hearing that, oh man, you must be so upset that people are using your spirits for cocktails. And I've always said, no, not at all. Like that's kind of, yeah, we're super proud of something that can be poured into a glass, either neat or on the rocks, and enjoyed as is. And obviously you craft something with that in mind, but 99% of the public is going to enjoy your spirit mixed with something else. And so being able to kind of go into that distillation process, especially with gin, where again, you have so much control over so many variables, you can create something with that end cocktail in mind, and to be able to go, hey, I know there's a bunch of London Dries out on the market. I know there's stuff that's focusing on floral, focusing on citrus forward. But what I want to do is I'm going to create a gin that is going to go absolutely killer in a Ramos Gin Fizz. Or I want to create like what I know I call it, I think a lot of people call it like a commodity gin. Like, here's a gin that is a meat and potatoes solid gin that can be mixed in almost any type of classic gin cocktail. And I think us as distillers, we kind of start to develop that palate and can kind of look at whether it's cocktails in a restaurant, whether it's dinner pairings, but being able to go, these are the notes that we know are in here. These are the layers you're going to get, and here's our suggestions. But it's also really cool to then take that and go, but I want to see what you can do. Take that to a bartender or to a chef and be like, this is how I drink it. This is how I've learned, or how we've learned is the ideal way that we like it, but we want to see your imagination go wild with it.
Yeah, I think one of the things that sets gin apart from any of the other spirits is it is so cocktail centric. If you look at what people use whiskey for and what people are using rum for and what people are using tequila and vodka and everything for, there's a certain segment, a chunk of that of people who really do prefer to drink it neat, on the rocks, kind of really on its own. But gin is such a just cocktail dominated spirit. I think in the US, last year the ACSA said like over 98% of gin in the US was drinking in a cocktail. That says something right there. And over 60%, this is the other interesting thing I always find about gin, is over 60% of all gin was drinking in a single cocktail. And that is the gin and tonic. And this is one spirit where one singular cocktail really runs the gambit. So anytime we do any gin, we test it in gin and tonic, martini, and a Negroni. That makes up a giant segment of how people are going to be drinking gin, which is I always found really fascinating that, there's so many different whiskey cocktails, so many different vodka cocktails, so many different of all of these, but gin is really, really dominated by so few cocktails. And that's starting to change, which is cool. Like Max is saying, the cocktail culture and these really high-end cocktail bars are starting to change people's perception of, I do like what Mark is saying. Rambo's Gin Fizz is awesome. But like I did Gin Ricky Week down in DC, and it was great. I love Gin Ricky's now, and it's cool to see that. And I think it's starting to trend in that direction, which is exciting for gin because, I love a good gin tonic. One of my favorite cocktails. But it's cool to see, I think, people opening up to, there's so many different uses for gin, and, maybe that will translate into people picking up some more bottles and trying more stuff at home.
Are there any
pairing? I like to drink gin while I'm making dinner, and it can pair with anything. But it's such a good while you're cooking, sipping spirit. Love gin.
I was just going to ask, and I'm glad you touched on the pairing because I was going to specifically hammer that point again. Is there some dish or something that everybody needs to be eating while they're enjoying your gin? Or should they enjoy your gin when they plan to make XYZ dish at home?
Yeah. I had 2 nights ago as a stress eating paired a beautiful martini with a number 3 meal from McDonald's. I highly recommend. Quarter pounder with cheese and a gin and tonic. It's excellent.
All right. Thank you for the humor. At least I can count on a good laugh with you guys. Mark, do you have any suggestions for your spirit, what people should be considering, or a cocktail that you would recommend? You love to cook, so I think that you would have great input.
Oh yeah, no, my wife and I are massive foodies, and I have such a soft spot for gin because that's my wife's favorite spirit, and her name's also Jen, so Jen loves gin. But we have always cooked with different types of gin, and that's when we started to realize kind of what we've been talking about this entire time. You adjust your gin based on what you're making or what you're eating. And so like for ours, with our Genever inspired gin, because it has that heavy malt base and because it is a little bit more towards the whiskey end as opposed to a dry end, we actually steer people to use it kind of as a switch out in place of whiskey cocktails. It makes an absolutely amazing white Manhattan, quote unquote. So utilizing the Genever inspired gin, like a nice Blanc vermouth and something like a Kochi Americano to get it extra bitter. But like conversely, kind of like Braden had said, I'm a huge fan of the Negroni. I mean, it's a brilliant cocktail. It shows off the spirit. With ours, because of how heavy it is, I always recommend to people, you can actually pull back on the gin a little bit. So typically it's like a 1 to 1 to 1. It's equal parts of your gin, Campari, and your vermouth, your sweet vermouth. If you actually have too much of any of those, with our gin, it actually throws it way off balance. And so we always recommend try it by itself first, try it neat, and adjust from there, And I'm also a big proponent of there's no wrong way to drink, other than to excess, I guess. But, people are like, oh, well, should I drink it like this? Or should I make this cocktail? Or I shouldn't use it in this cocktail. And I always maintain, if you like it how you mixed it, then you're drinking it properly.
Those are good words to live by. I've heard Dan from Miscellaneous offer very similar feedback, which is he doesn't like to give anybody a suggestion on how to drink anything. It's kind of like, drink it how you enjoy it. And I think that those are great words to live by.
Yeah, I would maintain here's how I like it, but
I've heard the Negroni come up a few times. I know you guys are offering prepackaged Negroni cocktails to go. Do you see that tends to be one of the most accessible cocktails for your customer?
It's actually kind of interesting. The Negroni is definitely a cocktail drinker's cocktail. I would not recommend a Negroni for someone who doesn't like bitter and doesn't like spirit forward. Because again, going through those ingredients, it is a 100% spirit cocktail. So it packs a wallop. It's very nuanced. It's a sipper. But what we have found are people who are really into gin and who really want to focus on that base spirit. The Negroni is a great hit. It lets people really kind of dig down into it. And it kind of related to that, with when the law was passed to allow all of us to serve cocktails in our tasting rooms, one of the little proclivities in that is you have to produce 100% of the alcohol in-house. So that actually gave us a unique opportunity that we got to develop our own Amaro and our own vermouth in-house that could be crafted specifically to match with our gin. So I also give people that caveat. If you go home and make a Negroni, it's not going to taste exactly like the one that you get at our place because everything is made 100% in-house.
One of the things that we did in these times is we started bottling cocktails, partly because we couldn't take advantage of that cocktail law that Mark just mentioned. So we started with two. One was a Manhattan made with an apple brandy, but we also did a Negroni with our Dutch style gin, and it's been a huge hit. And we were really surprised by how much demand there was for that, particularly throughout the summer months. And I think just seeing the colors is one of the biggest draws. And we really like how that Genever fits in the Negroni. So we do it a little bit differently than Mark because it is sweet. The Genever is more so than a London dry gin. We use a dry vermouth instead. So we try and keep more or less the 1-to-1-to-1 and maybe use a little bit more of our gin just because we don't want it to get washed out with the Campari. But it's just so versatile that you could come up with any proportions, and I think you'd be able to find something that hit those same notes, and it would be recognizable to someone who's more familiar with Negroni made with a London dry. So it's such a flexible spirit, and we're going to explore using the different styles of our Dutch gin and more bottled cocktails as we move forward. Because a barrel finished Genever aged gin that's just really made for a Manhattan or an old fashioned. It's something that we're gonna keep exploring.
I'm wondering how close you're going to be coming into like with some of these rye backed and barrel finished gins. How soon we're going to see like the ultimate mashup of like the Boulevardier versus the barrel finished Negroni and see like which one people lean towards in their preference.
Maybe that could be a collaboration. We trade barrels and have some barrel finished cocktails.
That would be excellent.
Cool. So we're getting close to time to wrap. I appreciate the time that all of you have taken to join me this afternoon, and we've had a couple dozen people pop in and out of viewing this, and I know that they're going to come back and want to finish when they have all the opportunity to do so. But can we go kind of around the horn and let people know where you're located, what guests can experience when they come in for a visit right now, especially due to the craziness that is the world around us, and any future plans you have to expand your opening or expand your operation. And let's start with Max, and then we'll work to Mark, Nate, and Jeff, and then Braden.
Sure. We are currently open only as a bottle shop, but our regular hours. So that's Wednesday to Sunday. You can pop in and buy a bottle. Other than that, we're not doing any tours or tastings. But the exciting news is that we have broken ground on a new tasting room, which will be cocktail compliant. So when we do reopen, and we're not sure when that will be, it will be a brand new visitor experience. You'll be able to blend your own whiskey, have cocktails, see entertainment at night, still do tours of the production facility. We're super excited about it. And hopefully that space will be open as a bottle shop by Christmas time, so you can come in and kind of preview the space even before we're doing cocktails sometime next year.
And you guys are located in the Union Collective there, kind of in northern part of the city, right?
Hamden-ish, yeah, in Baltimore City. Union Brewing is here. There's an ice creamery, a coffee roastery, and the Wine Collective, the only Baltimore urban vineyard, is open and serving wine down the hallway.
Once the cocktail experience opens at Baltimore Spirits Company, that's going to be a fascinating opportunity for consumers to come in and really explore everything that the craft alcohol industry has to offer in the state of Maryland.
A true house of vices.
Yeah, especially for all the people who are there for ice cream.
Maybe a
Mark, what's going on with 10th Ward?
Yeah, so 10th Ward, we are located here in downtown Frederick, Maryland. We are actually just right on Patrick Street, which is one of the main downtown drags. We are actually open inside at 50% capacity with social distancing. Obviously, making sure that anybody who does come in, we're staying safe, we're staying healthy. We have what we call our cocktail lab, which is focused on creating, we call them elevated cocktails, that obviously kind of the goal is to bring people in, be able to showcase our spirits that we make, and then be able to show them how to mix with those. We have a wide range of everything from very simple on the sweeter kind of basic cocktails to the super complex, very bitter, very citrus forward, very spirit forward. So one of the things that we're very proud of is being able to create a way for people to really experience the spirits hands-on and maybe give them some ideas on how they can utilize that themselves. The big thing, we just did a soft launch of it 2 weeks ago, but we're doing a full release out into wholesale with what I've been sipping on. Speaking of gin cocktails, there we go. We actually just canned our first Corpse Reviver, what we call our Corpse Reviver number 10, which actually utilizes our Jennifer-inspired gin and our Absinthe Nouvelle. Uses chai vanilla syrup, a little bit of lemon, a little bit of citrus, so it's this really nice, well-balanced kind of sweeter cocktail. We're very excited for that. We're going to be expanding our canned cocktail options over the next 2 weeks as well. We're actually in the process of continued growth. We're not sure what the timeline is, but we started searching for a larger production facility to keep up with the demand, which is something that we are very, very excited for. So, but I would say we are also open for tours as well. We limit it to 10 people. Again, it's a socially distanced tour where you do get to sample everything, and that happens on Saturdays at 3 o'clock, I believe.
I think that lab experience is awesome. The opportunity to kind of give people a hands-on education and the ability to take something a little more tangible than just something to drink. You know, they come back with knowledge and a skill that's useful, and they can show off to their friends. So that's pretty cool. Nate,
That was our goal.
how are things going with you guys, and where are you located, and what can guests experience there?
So we're in Hyattsville, Maryland, just over about a mile outside of the DC area. And right now we are doing primarily online orders and then curbside pickup. So people order online, and then on Saturdays they come and pick it up, and then we do deliveries on Sundays. So you can check us out on our website if you want to do that. And if you want to pick up, make sure you wear your mask.
And Braden, what's going on at McClintock, and how can people come and support you?
We are also in downtown Frederick. We're about recommend hitting up both. We are open Thursdays through Sundays for socially distant tastings, and we're doing tours on Saturdays and Sundays every 2 hours here with a little bit smaller groups. So we recommend those have been selling out pretty regularly. So definitely book a spot online if you would like to do that. Still not doing cocktails down here, so just tastings. So, and you can also order for delivery 30 miles anywhere from Frederick for free, or curbside pickup 7 days a week down here. So we're also still making hand sanitizer. We're slashing the prices. So if you need sanitizer, we'll get it to you cheap.
For those of you who did not
That's
hear the
pretty much
beginning of Braden's pitch because it kind of crackled out a little bit. I think he was saying that he's right around the corner, essentially, from 10th Ward. You can hit both of them within like a 2-minute walk. And when he says down here, he literally means down here. They're at the bottom of a very steep hill, and it's always fun to try to climb back up that after you visit it. So get out to all of these distilleries, show your
in
support.
Frederick.
Yeah. Visit everybody's social media. All of these guys are active on Facebook, Instagram. They've got everything out there that you need. They've got beautiful websites that are all very well designed and easy to navigate, and you should go out and support them as often and as fervently as you can. So again, everybody, thank you very much for taking the time this afternoon to talk about gin with me. I think this is a great way to kick off Maryland Spirits Month in terms of these talks. Give a little bit of education to the people that are going to be supporting your businesses and get them excited about the unique things that you're doing. So thank you very much.
Thanks for asking us.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
For everybody that's tuning in this afternoon, please stay safe this coming weekend. Enjoy yourselves. Visit all of our distilleries or the distillery most local to you. Please abide by all of the policies they have in place for COVID-19. For them to operate means that they need everybody to participate in the guidelines. So do your best and visit marylandspirits.org for updated Maryland Spirits Month information. And we'll talk to you next week. Goodbye.